Please be seated. I open this academic session in which Mrs. Hasmi is going to defend her thesis, Network Complexity Modeling of Psychopathology to Encompass Symptoms, Genetic Environmental Influences. I welcome you and wish you lots of success. I welcome also the supervisors, Professor van Os, Dr. Goulaxous and Dr. Drucker. Of course, also the opponents, whom you will meet later. And of course, you, sir, in the audience and all people online. But before we start the opposition, I give you the floor to present what you have said in your thesis.
Dear Prorector, highly esteemed opponents, friends, family, welcome to my defense. Thank you for being here. I would like to talk to you today about a problem that burdens 1 in every 8 people worldwide. Also a problem that is associated with 14% of mortality worldwide and costs, therefore, societies a lot of money, almost 4% of gross domestic product, for example, in European countries. Yeah. And these are psychiatric disorders. So, and how do we approach psychiatric disorders today? We approach them as chapters in a book. When a patient comes to us, we ask him, do you have a symptom? And if he has a symptom, for example, in the case of depression, we go to the next symptom. In depression, it's sadness most of the day, every day for at least 15 days, and or lack of motivation plus some other symptoms. And this approach of categorizing mental disorders was not unsuccessful until now. So it has given us 70% of recovery after the first episode's depression. But what about the 30% who do not recover? And what about the 60% of first episode psychosis? Those are people who lose touch with the reality, who do not recover. So this approach has something wrong. And this is why over the last 10 to 20 years, scientists have started to reveal that symptoms are not merely isolated entities that come into a list in a chapter, but they are dynamic, they are active, they cause each other. And on the other hand, scientists were looking into causes of mental disorders and found that not only genes cause mental disorders or the environment causes mental disorders, but they interact with each other. So the association of both gives something. So the question remained, and this is what I try to answer in this research, how the causes that are interacting with each other and the symptoms that are interacting with each other interact with each other to give us a mental disorder and mental suffering. And this is why I focused on 3 things. First, how symptoms impact each other. Second, how genetic factors, childhood trauma, impact these symptoms. And I did so by employing many methodologies. And the main methods I used, first, we used general population samples, very large general population samples. Why? Because we wanted to see the rise and the happening of mental disorder, the new one. So because we are interested in the genesis, so the mechanism. And second, we used a new technology that is called experience sampling method, but it is basically, we do not rely on the memory of the participants, how they feel. We ask them to report when a beep is is there. They hear a beep, and then they record their emotional state or their behavior, and in 5 minutes maximum. So it is a reliable way to record the mental states over time. The third main method was to collect information about genetics and the environment. And the key findings of this research was first that were interesting and surprising, because genetic tendency to develop mental disorder was associated not with all emotional states, but with negative emotional changes. That means psychopathology and the change of negative emotions can be genetically determined. And also, the second thing, also a surprising fact, is that psychotic symptoms, for example, hearing voices or having ideas about the word that is not correct, is not enough for clinical significance, for a high enough burden that leads to the need for care. But it has to be associated with an affective disorder or anxiety disorder. So something that has as in its root this inability of dealing with emotional change. And also the causes, so the genetic component that is classically related with psychotic symptoms only when the both are present. So not only hearing voices or having ideas, but also when there is affective dysregulation. So this problem with emotion change. So in other words, we have people, so individuals who are born with a tendency to not know how to deal, they struggle with their emotions. And when they struggle with their emotions, they start seeing the world differently. And at the same time, the more stressful circumstances they have, the more burden they have. But is it enough now? So now we have, so imagine a house, we want to build a house, so we want to have an understanding of mental disorders. But, so we have the walls now, we have stones are linked together, we have symptoms that are linked together. But is it enough? So we need a blueprint, right? So we need to know where to put rooms, so that we can build a house and know how to use it. And for that, we need a model. And that is why I suggest using complexity as a model. And to make it simple, I invite you to, so what is a complex system? So complexity doesn't mean that it is difficult to understand, but complexity is a field in science that studies phenomena. For example, we have this around us in everyday world. For example, the weather is a complex system. And complexity is characterized by few characteristics. So for example, there are units in this system. For example, in a market, there are a lot of people and products. Second, small changes have big consequences. So a small snowball can bring an avalanche. Third, there is something called emergence. So the units that are in this system doesn't mean anything. They don't mean anything. So the pieces of the puzzle don't mean something. But when we put them together, we have a beautiful image. So the sum of pieces is more than the whole is more than the sum of the pieces. So, and third, this market that is crowded, full of dynamic change, it's at the same time, it adjusts when there is an external factor. So if it starts to rain, then the people will hide somewhere and maybe the market will stop. So it adapts to external. But a most important characteristic is when this system stays the same. So when someone has a mental disorder, if he stops medication, he has the mental disorder further. So it's a system that self-organizes. And a nice metaphor is when we see in the sky these birds. So scientists, they say there is no bird that is a leader. They tend to organize themselves in that way, in this perfect way. So this is an interesting system, and if we apply it on what we found in this thesis plus the literature, what other researchers found, we see that, for example, so we have units, like the puzzle or like the market, and we have self-organization because we have this feedback loop. For example, so when people start having hearing voices and they suffer because of it, they start performing less at school, and then they start having less revenue, and then they go in crowded neighborhood. They have more stress or they are stigmatized, and this leads and self-organizes the system. So the system goes further. So in conclusion, symptoms are not isolated. They make sense only because they are part of a system. Second, affective dysregulation plays a critical role in this system. And third, there is interest in conceptualizing the causal system and answering the question, why do mental disorders happen, using the blueprint of complexity. So what do we do in the future? So of course, this research is just a piece. We need more studies. But there are some immediate applications, maybe, because if we understand that symptoms are not enough, they are just a unit in this whole system, we need to go backwards and look at the general population and act on how children, for example, deal with their emotions at school, or the problems that are at the level of the general population in primary care for other problems. For example, they come for digestive problems and they have the trauma at home, so they need a social worker maybe in primary care units. So it invites us to have a nuanced approach to mental disorders and to prevention. But most importantly, we need a multidisciplinary research team. We need to include mathematicians because complexity system is a branch of mathematics, and we need to work together. Yes, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Hasmi, for a very interesting presentation of your work. We are now going to start the opposition, and the first opponent is also the chair of your assessment committee, that's Professor van Amersfoort, and she's professor of transitional psychiatry in the departments of psychiatry and neuropsychology in the Faculty of Health, Medicine and Life Sciences in the University of Maastricht.
Thank you. Dear candidates, first of all, I would like to congratulate you with your very impressive thesis and your very interesting presentation. I also want to extend my congratulations to your supervisors. And yeah, I understand your PhD trajectory was not an easy one when I read on page 193. And we've met each other over the last few years a couple of times. So I think very well done for completing this bumpy trajectory. Also because you combined it with your clinical work in a foreign country and far away from your supervisors. So that adds to the complexity in your life. But I just heard you love complexity. And so, yeah, no problem. Also, your whole thesis is full of complexity, not only content-wise, but there's also the word complex is everywhere, in the title, in the propositions, in every chapter. So yes, well, for me, it was complex to read. I can tell you, I'm a clinician also, but some of the methods I had to read, I really had to read a few times to try to understand. But it's, yeah, it's very impressive. And you included 4 original data articles that all have been published, and investigating the connections between psychiatric symptoms and genetic and environmental factors by mainly using this novel network approach that you obviously are a fan of versus a traditional latent variable approach. And so I want to go to the word symptom, which is also a word you use a lot. And I really liked your introduction because it was also very educational. I learned a lot from your thesis. And the word symptom as a sum of questions that are traditionally part of our categorical system and that are listed and summed up together with a cutoff score, whereas you introduced the more momentary mental state, although you have decided very early on to use the word symptom for the word momentary mental state. So sometimes it was confusing which one you meant. But I wanted to ask you first question, do you think we should abandon the classical, traditional word symptom in clinical psychiatry? And if so, why?
There was a very, first, thank you, highly esteemed Dr. Amersfoort. I hope I pronounced your name right. For that insightful question, and to address it, I would like what comes in my mind is the one interesting article of Marika Wickers. She actually dealt with this question about symptoms and mental states, and this is actually inherent to the method we use in experience sampling method, because mental state can be also in a normal individual. So first, this is the first difference. So mental state can be in a normal individual and an individual without a problem, a psychiatric problem, and an individual who has a psychiatric problem. And second, symptom lasts over time, and the mental state can be only seconds, like an emotion, for example.
It's more dynamic.
It's dynamic and momentary.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't abandon symptoms.
You shouldn't abandon symptoms.
No.
So you actually say, I would do NN. Both.
Yes. This is what I said, yes.
So how, because then I would like to continue this discussion further, how would you introduce this momentary mental state into clinical practice? And I refer here to chapter 5, where this patient was followed for 1 year, which when I think it must have been exhausting, for 1 year, 10 beeps a day, 4 days a week, when you're also having a psychotic disorder, but that's another question. But so how would that be feasible to translate into clinical practice? Because this was one case, published in 2016, and I haven't seen it since. Do you, what would you...
That is, thank you, this is a really good question. So the problem with mental states is, and experience sampling method is the intensity, of course. And in this particular case, the patient in chapter 4, we call this her Cinderella, was the patient of Dr. Martin Bach.
I know.
Yes, she was particular because she went through a lot in her life, and she had a lot of secondary effect of medication. And so she was motivated to gain control over her disorder. And also, before the study even started, Dr. Martin Bach has already started with her a plan to self-manage her medication. So because clozapine has this big, some secondary effects on the weight and diabetes. So they agreed 350 milligram is the doses for the long term, but when she feels that a relapse will happen, we call it independent state, then she increased it with 100 or 50 milligram. Yeah. And then when she comes, and she also has a problem, she needs control because of her childhood also, I think, when we read her biography. So this is one hypothesis, but loss of control played a role in her, how she lived her problem.
So the ASM allowed her to control a bit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So my question is, did it affect the treatment? Because the article stops at some point.
Yes.
So is she still using the ESM? Did it affect her? Did it prevent her relapses in the end, or did it help? Because that would be good to know.
That would be definitely good to know, and I hope I can speak with Martin Bach about it.
Or you haven't spoken to him since?
No, about the paper, not really. But when I was writing the thesis, I had this question in mind, and because it is full of suspense. Yes, we want to know, because what was interesting in this paper is, for example, that the patient was seeing some symptoms as severe, but when we did the network, they were not really central. They were not important in the dynamic, and they didn't predict the next state. For example, she was thinking that hearing voices was the most the problem, but paranoia was playing a role.
So it gave more insight, which was useful for both the patient and for Dr. Bach.
Yes, exactly.
And now, because you're a psychiatrist yourself, would you, on the basis of that one experience in the patient population, are you a fan to introduce ESM into clinical practice? And why? Or why not?
I would like to introduce it in clinical practice, but not immediately, because we humans, we like immediate reward. And with experience sampling method, the way we do it now, doesn't come with immediate reward, high immediate reward. So I would first wish to contribute in studies that improve computer science-based apps and personalized medicine. So, and I know that in 2015 or 14, already a student in Amsterdam was working on an app that shows in real life the network of symptoms. So the patient could see actually how it works in real life. And this would be maybe better. So if
so technology isn't ready yet. Humans are ready, but technology not yet.
Yes.
Yeah. One final question, if I may. So overall, most of the studies are done in general population cohorts, eh?
Yes.
So how much does that say or give us information about psychopathology, real clinical psychopathology?
We see that when we compare the studies, right? When we see the study, even if it's one patient, she had more symptoms, more severe symptoms. Yes, so we have less severe symptoms in the general population. But in the third study, chapter 3, so that was the reason so the research question wanted us to not look into the selected patients that already have severe symptoms, because we want to see what contributes to them even happening. So we need to see before. So it was like a necessary choice. And so symptoms were then new. So hearing voices, we had hearing voices in this population. We had delusions in this population. We had non-psychiatric disorders, depression, anxiety. And we used that, yes. So.
Thank you very much. I'm satisfied, and I hand the word back to the prorector.
Thank you very much, Professor van Amersfoort, for your opposition. Then we come to the following opponent, who is also a member of the assessment committee, and that's Professor Moussaoui. He is Emeritus Professor of Psychiatry in the Psychiatric University Center of Casablanca, and that is in Morocco. And thank you for coming all the way from Morocco. The University of Maastricht is always glad to have guests from abroad. The floor is yours.
It is my pleasure to be here. It's a real honor to be member of the jury of Laila Hasmi thesis. Thank you very much, Professor Van Os, for the invitation. I do appreciate having two people, one who was trained in Casablanca during 5 years, and one, Professor Van Os, was one of our invitees in the early 80s of last century, and he knows the department well. Now, I would like to tell you that I had great pleasure reading your thesis. I learned a number of things. Thank you for that. And I would like also to say that I didn't understand everything, and that probably we will need a few hours to explain to me a number of things like graph theory and centrality measures and things like that. I mean, I have still a lot to learn about it. Now I'm an old man mentality, and history for me is something very important. Psychopathology, if we read Sigmund Freud, he wrote about it long time ago, more than a century ago. Same for general psychopathology, written by Karl Jaspers. He was 26 years old when he wrote that fantastic book. And people of the phenomenology, talking about German phenomenology, like Tellenbach and others, I mean, they also talked about psychopathology. Somebody like Heimann, for example, came to Casablanca from Germany in the early 80s, talking about importance of physiology, biology, but also symptoms and how to deal with the importance of the connection between the two. My question is, and Jean Delay also, I mean, wrote about that with different words. My question is, how would you define psychopathology?
So thank you, highly esteemed Professor Moussaoui. Psychopathology, as we use it in this work, right, is intertwined a little bit with symptoms. So it is what we see that is pathological in the psychological functioning of the patient. So, for example, sadness is not psychopathology. Sadness is just an emotional state, a normal one. But a depressive mood is psychopathology, a psychopathological state. And because in this work we try to get out of categories, so we look into the units of the system also. So it is a combined strategy. It is at the same time reductionist and associationist.
I understand what you say. This is exactly what phenomenologists say. And it's important also to come back to the origin of the word and the concept. Cultural influence on symptoms was not mentioned at all. I mean, and you come from Africa, long way from home. You might have also spoken about this to some extent.
Yes.
What do you think of that?
Well, I spoke about it in future directions, at least. And when I said that in future studies, there is interest in furthering the use of experience sampling method, and most broadly speaking about emotions, because emotions are transcultural. So, in contrast with psychotic symptoms that can be culturally influenced.
So that will be for the future.
It is in the present too. We use emotions because they are transcultural too.
Yes, yeah. I mean, transcultural will be also something that will be of interest to you in the future. I would like to finish saying that, in fact, the biopsychosocial paradigm is something extremely important for the future, for the present and for the future of psychiatry. And I'm sure Professor Van Os remembers the theme of the World Congress of Social Psychiatry in Lisbon in 2013. The theme was biopsychosocial model, the future of psychiatry. And he gave a fantastic plenary lecture. And I remember that I came late to his lecture and he was not happy with that. Apologized 10 years later. It is really something that is extremely important. Last but not least, you said something very important in your thesis. Quantity, to some extent, leads to a different quality and something different. So I think this is also something to dig into in the future. Thank you very much for your work. It has been a wonderful experience. Thank you.
Thank you, highly esteemed report.
Thank you very much, Professor Moussaoui, for your opposition. We come now to the following opponent, who's also a member of the assessment committee, and that's Dr. Mesmoudi, and she's a research professor of artificial intelligence in the habilitation in the research center of the University of Paris, and that is in France. And thank you for coming all the way from Paris.
Thank you very much to give me the chance to participate to this defense. Because for me it is the first time I have seen work the frame psychiatric illness as an emergence of a complex system. And it is an honor for me to be part of this work. And I love to believe that I was the starter event in this complex adventure that is your thesis. And I thank you to present this complex problem with a very good simplicity. Thank you very much, Mrs. Hasmi. And my question is about a model. Have you considered developing a model for the emergence of this disorder? By model, I mean something like a model that could give us states, different states of this illness. Your approach placed a significant emphasis on describing and characterizing the dynamics of this emergence, but based on your observations and based on this complex system, could you have or develop a model that could give us several states or all the states of this development or emergence of this illness?
Thank you, esteemed Dr. Mesmoudi, for this insightful question. So to address it, I think I need to understand it from the perspective of a mathematician, right? Yeah. And statistics, yes. So what I mean now by a complex system, complex dynamical system understanding of the findings is yet now hypothetical and theoretical first, but it is my intention in the future to work with mathematicians and like yourself, maybe, and it would be my honor, and at least because it is another way of working with data. So there are at least two. When I was writing the discussion of this thesis, means start of this year, there was only 2 studies who used real data plus complexity methods, like using partial differential equations and space-time modeling to see. So what you say is, first we collect the data, right? And then we train a model. And this model, then we change some parameters in a simulation basis. And then we see what will happen, what state will arise. And after that, it is a way of thinking that is not traditional in the way we. So until now, studies have been, we have data, we analyze them, we see the prediction of one variable on the other, but we never use, I mean, it's at the very beginning. really. So, and I would like to be part of that in the future.
Yeah,
It is interesting.
Yeah, I hope. My second question is about if you think about a system to calculate resilience. Resilience, and also robustness of your system.
Do you mean resilience, the psychological phenomenon of resilience? So the person who, because there is a definition of resilience, that means that the person has trauma in her life, and then she rises stronger. She develops new. This is what you mean, and it would be a very interesting question, indeed, to see if the participants that are under the environmental exposure and genetic exposure, if they will be able to not have a psychosis, to not have the need for care, to analyze the other patients that, because now we shed the light on the part of the participants who developed the need for care, for example, and we didn't analyze the other ones, right? Okay. So yeah, it will be interesting to look at that. And about robustness, we did a lot of robustness in the studies, the network studies, for example. We used person mean centering, for example, to disentangle within person variation from between person variation. In other words, to not let the mean of for example, in the group with childhood trauma, they had a mean of childhood trauma, a mean score, and that was at the mean score of childhood trauma at the person level. And then they had different emotions also at the person level. That means if I am sad, at this moment, the next moment, we can like sum and do the mean. And this mean should not pollute the calculations, because we need to see also the variation between this state and the next state. So we reduce the mean from the variable. We call it person mean centering. And also we detrended the data from the time trend, because this can also bias the variation. So we added that in the model, the regression model. And we used permutations because some of the variables were non-linear, had a floor effect. So we also did that, and we did sensitivity analysis. And this is how we try to address robustness. But there are some other methods now, for example, that weren't at the beginning of these studies, that weren't developed yet, but they were developed later, like the bootnet package or the network comparison and a lot of. Yes, so there might be better robustness in the future.
Yeah, thank you very much. But I think if in the future you think to develop the model, there is a lot of potential direction that you could develop, because you could imagine the trajectory of the patient with several therapies, and you could calculate the resilience. You could also calculate the robustness of therapies or some indication. There is a lot of potential that you could develop if you work on the model. Thank you very much, and very, very important work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Moody, for your opposition. The following opponent is also a member of the assessment committee, Professor Strick. She's professor of mental health care for children and adolescents with psychiatric problems and somatic comorbidity in the Department of Psychiatry in the Maastricht University Medical Center. And today she has also accepted the role of secretary of this committee, for which I'm very grateful. The floor is yours, Professor Strick.
Thank you, Mr. Prorector. Dear Mrs. Candidate, I also want to congratulate you on this very important work. I think I agree with my colleagues, and also congratulations for your promotion team. I think this is a very important topic because you studied the interplay and try to make a network analysis on several factors, like affective dysregulation and environmental and genetic factors in first episode of psychosis and also for subclinical psychotic features already. I think this is also very important because you say you are a medical doctor also. So I think it's very important to combine research and clinical experience and try to use the research also to initiate further improvement of intervention and therapy and so on. So I think it's complex to combine both research and clinical experience. So I congratulate you also on that. I'm also a psychiatrist and I do work in the fields with children. Also do clinical research in children, very young children. And I think this network analysis can be a very important factor because I think children are very prone or are very vulnerable, and they have a lot of environmental factors that can also cause vulnerabilities like decompensation and like the onset of mental problems. I do research in children who have illness, somatic illness, and that I want to discuss with you because I think in your network analysis I miss a factor, and that is of the biological factor or the somatic factors. And I wondered whether you thought about that too, to integrate it into your network analysis, and if so, what are your thoughts about that, and if not, also to explain that a little bit further.
Thank you, highly esteemed Dr. Strick, Professor Strick, sorry, for this interesting question. And so, if I understand well, your question is about somatic comorbidities or the biological.
Yeah. For example, you also studied, I think, trauma in prior history, or
yes.
And I think you can also have trauma like brain trauma, but also we know that, for example, when you have had an infection, you can also develop later on mental health problems. You mentioned that already in your thesis because you mentioned infection.
Yes.
But you did mention a few specific factors, but I was curious how you saw it in a broader perspective.
I talked about infections in the interpretation of the data. So, what mechanism can gene-environment interaction have? And but to reply to your first question, we had a big problem in this study at the beginning. It was 2013, and work on networks was at the embryo stage, very at the beginning, and it was impossible to increase the number of variables even because we wanted to include, for example, paranoia and or suspiciousness as a mental state. No, but we had conversions, and at the same time, we didn't want to sacrifice a lot of robustness, so we needed to have a strong model. Yeah. And it was not possible because the computer stopped.
Okay.
There were what we call like elegantly convergence problem, but it was the memory, the working memory of the RAM of the computer was completely. So now it is more possible to do that because now we have more powerful computers and they are easily accessible. And so, but it's not the reason. The reason is the research question wasn't looking into biology at all. Okay. Because we were critical to biological psychiatry. In these papers, we wanted to look into the mental state first. And the genetic was the more biological thing we had. So, of course, we can't explore everything. We can't analyze everything. But it is an interesting question, and this could indeed may even bias the analysis if we know that some of the participants have. But I think it was, severe brain disorders or intelligence deficiency was already excluded from the twin scan, from the sample.
Yes. Yeah, it's very understandable that you cannot throw in all the variables you think of. So, but I think it would be possible afterwards to look whether there are some symptoms prior or in history, some somatic illnesses, for example. But I also wondered, because you did your studies in a patient population, I think they were between 15 and 35 years of age, in chapter 3, I think.
18.
Yeah. But you mentioned in your speech that it would also be interesting to do some research or use this SciMate in already in primary school or so in younger children. So I wonder that too. Do you think it's possible to use it in younger children? Because I get a lot of questions from parents, and they ask me, will they develop? We see behavior problems. Will my child develop psychosis or developmental disorder? Do you think it could be used also in younger children?
In my speech, I didn't speak about the experience sampling use in younger children, but in the prevention studies. We could do clinical studies of prevention. But at a wide general population, and what I mean in primary school, I mean, because we learn, there are a lot of education systems, of course, right? But there are some interesting education systems where children learn, for example, how to deal with the opposite gender. So there is an educational part in primary school that is really interesting. For example, when I was here in the Netherlands, I was I was like surprised, positively surprised to see how opposite gender deal with each other here in comparison with my original culture. And I was living in a VG, in a student house, and I asked the students, and she said, we learned that in school to respect each other, and that girls and boys are equal. And so why not include also emotional regulation? Because not all parents have time to, for example, teach the small children. So traditionally, when a child cries, when he needs something, he cries. So he cries if he's sad, he cries if he's angry, if he's anxious, it's only cries. But if the adult person comes to his level and told him, do you feel now fearful because of what happened? Yes. So he will learn that that feeling is called fearful. Yeah. So, and I feel we're now telling you that. I'm sure you know that. But this is what I meant.
Okay, nice. It's very, very clear. Thank you. I have a last short question. Do you think that your analysis, your network approach can also be used in other psychopathology, like developmental disorders? Because you focus on clinical psychosis, right? But perhaps you can use it because I think everything is related to everything. And you saw already that anxiousness and depressed mood has a relation to clinical psychosis. So do you think that you can use this model also for other kinds of psychopathology?
Yes. Indeed, this is only a start, and we could, because there must be a reason why we can't reach satisfying recovery rates, right? So we are missing something. And it doesn't hurt to use a new model, and that is actually around us. Complex systems are around us, and somehow we missed looking at it in psychiatry. So, of course, all disorders need this attention.
Yeah, Okay, I would very like to discuss this further with you, but for now I give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you, Professor Strick.
Thank you, Professor Strick, for your opposition. The following opponent is also a member of your assessment committee, that's Dr. Blokland, and she's working at the Department of Psychiatry and Neuropsychology in the Faculty of Health, Medicine and Life Sciences in the University of Maastricht. Dr. Blokland.
Dear candidate, dear Ms. Hasmi, firstly, congratulations to you and your supervisory team on a very interesting thesis, which I really enjoyed reading. So my first question relates to a few comments that you made in your discussions in a few of the chapters, particularly the first two empirical studies, where you actually highlighted that the data indicated that there's a pressing need to investigate the impact of basic demographic parameters, such as age and gender, on emotion networks, before progressing to network analysis of mental disorder constructs in the context of vulnerability, which I agree with. As far as I could see, you did not account for age or sex in your modeling, and in the first study I could understand because it was females only. But I was wondering if you were to do that, how would you approach that? And would you expect to see any differences between men and women in their network structure? Would you expect to see any age differences? Would you expect developmental effects in that network structure?
Thank you, esteemed Dr. Blokland. So your question is about if we planned to adjust for gender or
not necessarily adjust for it, but account for it somehow, or look at it somehow in your model.
Well, there is interest in doing that for certain, because recently there have been this study that actually looked at it, and it found that gender indeed made a difference in emotional regulation, and they even used a network for that. And the main difference was that male participants they tend to emotional suppression, and that is why there was lower dynamic in these networks compared to females. And we are willing to look at it in the future, where if we want to reanalyze the twin studies, by including the sex. But as I said before, we were limited in the convergence. We had a lot of parameters and a lot of calculations. But a sensitivity analysis would have been a good idea to include. For example, I would now, if I want to reanalyze this data, I would mix females from twin, because we need a big sample, so we can't actually reduce only the females from the second sample. So I would merge females from both samples and redo the analysis as a sensitivity analysis and look if the results will be different.
Yes, I was also thinking about this from the clinical perspective, which Professor van Amersfoort mentioned as well, that if the goal of ESM monitoring is to not just understand the illness and the relationships between the symptoms, but also to actually treat the patient in a more generalized manner, you would want to possibly take into account sex and age as well. How do you envision that?
Well, taking into account age, I wouldn't ask 5 years old to do it, to do experience sampling method, unless the parents are willing to do that. But this needs really studies to validate anyway. But well, I would not. But in the normal age population, like in the adult population, because I'm an adult psychiatrist, I would use if I see an interest, if I see that the patient needs to have more control or have less insight and needs to, because I had, for example, some patients in the beginning of the depression therapy who couldn't be aware of the fact that they had some moments of happiness. When I asked them, how was yesterday? The whole day sad. And at the same time, I have the feedback from therapists in the team, for ergotherapists, for example. They say they were smiling and happy that they did something in the ergotherapy. So actually, that would. So I wouldn't. So the answer is no. I mean, it doesn't have to do with the age necessarily, but it does have to do with the indication. If there is interest, if I see, and also if the patient agrees and sees interesting. And also on the diagnosis, because someone with depression and lack of motivation, I wouldn't expect him to really react to all beeps. And we need to have at least 30% of beeps that are replied to have valid results. And gender, I would use gender for both genders, of course. I mean, yes. But as long as we don't have studies, more studies that look into it, I wouldn't be able to really interpret what I find in patients. Because the scientific method is actually useful.
Okay, thank you. My other question related to your use of genetic liability in a couple of the studies and polygenic risk scores in another study. So in your two network modeling studies, you used a genetic liability based on psychosity and the related psychopathology risk. And you mentioned as a recommendation for future work that the present exploration of the effect of genes and environment on the affective regulation network should be replicated before expanding it to molecular genetic measures of risk such as polygenic risk scores. So assuming that you can replicate it, and when you were to incorporate polygenic risk scores, which in principle is a quantitative measure, into your modeling, into your network modeling, how would you do that differently from how you use the genetic liability now, which was divided into 3 groups?
Yeah, yes. I would divide it in 3 groups: low polygenic risk score, medium, and high, and compare the networks with more robustness with the new tools now that we have. Yeah.
What additional information would you expect to get out of
what is the interest? Why? This is why we didn't do it. I don't see. This is exactly the problem in complex systems. If we focus on really genetic factors, we don't know much. We need to look at other factors. So, I must say, because I'm not a genetician, a psychiatric genetician. If I was a psychiatric genetician, I would have a most exhaustive answer to this question, because it needs some knowledge to compare studies that use polygenic risk score and genetic liability. Because what we used in the first 2 studies are dry genetics, so we estimated this from the twin quality of the sample. And the polygenetic risk score is a more direct, so we look directly into the mutations and we correlate them to, and we do the prediction with the symptoms and our dependent variables. So it is quite different, and there is necessarily more to it as an answer.
Okay, thank you. I think there's a bit more.
Short question.
Short question. So based on your findings that psychotic experiences with non-psychotic disorder comorbidity is integral to transitions to psychosis and their differential characterization in terms of additional risk factors, and your argument...
Okay, we'll leave it here. Thank you, Dr. Blokland, for your opposition. But the time appointed for you defending your thesis has passed, Mr. Hasmi. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your manuscript, of your thesis, and the way you defended it. And I request that you await the results of our deliberation and our return in this room, and also the audience online, of course. We will be back, and I suspend this meeting.
Thank you.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Southside, 10 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. All your time, 'cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Take the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. Even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you won the battle once you've grown. Southside, 10 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. 'Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Please be seated.
I reopen this academic session. Mrs. Candidate, Mrs. Hasmi, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and the way you defended it. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor van Os is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
Please all rise.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
By the authority invested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Laila Hasmi, the degree of doctor, and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university. Right, so now there's normally a paranymph to take it away from you. So shall I do it? So then you can we'll give it to the co-promoter. So, Laila, you are a testimony of persistence, endurance, and resilience. And let's attach to that robustness. Not in the sense of person-centered means, but in the sense of being able to achieve something of great quality despite significant adversity. And I think I might summarize it as عندك عقل كبير ونفسك قوية. And I think some of the members here will understand what I just said. And you know, there was a question about time. So let's take a space-time perspective of this journey. When I think it was in 2013 that the distinguished Professor Moussaoui, whom I had the pleasure to know already, of course, said, I have this great student who's extremely intelligent and is wanting to do research. And can she come and work in the department? And it was facilitated, and so you came. And this was 10 years ago, so from a space-time perspective, that's very interesting. So the 10 years PhD, and I think the great quality of the scientist that you have is that you are never really satisfied, I think, with your own data and your own conclusions. You always have this tendency of, there must be more to explain. We can have more rigorous, more affirmative, more definitive conclusions to draw if we ask more questions. And I think Dr. van Amersfoort already mentioned page 193, where we read of interesting dynamics between the PhD students and the supervision team, the formidable Marianne Drucker and the formidable Sinan Guloksus, and my learning self, my humbly learning self from you, in the sense of don't be too hasty. There's always another question that can be asked and must be answered. So this is a great quality, a great scientific quality in you. And I think with everything that happened in this space-time journey, your persistence of never being satisfied with any result or replication is a great scientific quality. But you also psychoanalyzed yourself to the degree that you now have finished the product. And your personal development in this all was also very interesting, because you came to the Netherlands in a noisy student environment with, and you were asking people questions, simple questions like, how do you do this? And how do you make so much noise all the time? And how do people sort of look after each other in this society? And it was extremely difficult, I think. And there you were, plottering on, and delving into incredibly complex models that became so complex that not even the formidable Marianne Drucker could follow anymore what you were doing, and you were sort of trying to develop a personal space-time complexity perspective on twin study symptomatology measured with experience sampling. Very impressive. And I think this really evolved over time, and we lost a little bit contact because you needed to subsist, to earn your subsistence. So you transplanted yourself from Dutch society into German society, working as a clinical psychiatrist there, which definitely was not easy. And what I found very interesting was, and comforting for myself, was that you said, well, discrimination in the Netherlands is one thing, but in Germany it's even worse. So that felt strangely comforting for my Dutch self in some way, but it also meant how hard it was for you in Germany. But still you kept plodding on, developing yourself, and also at personal level finding strength to sort of overcome all the effects of cumulative adversity, and reinventing yourself also as a fine clinical psychiatrist, because you told me, I have come to see my patients through a different perspective, through a different prism. And you developed through your research also a personal clinical perspective that brought you closer to your patients and their own suffering, which I think is very, very significant. So we have the academic development, we have the personal development, but also the clinical and the cultural development. So all incredible, significant achievements. And I think you should know that some of the things that were said in the assessment committee was one, that somebody said it's very important that you continue to develop your perspective on emergent systems in relation to mental states and transitioning to clinical psychopathology, and build a bridge to the complexity community, which you're already doing because you're training yourself to become a complexity scientist as well. You're taking up studies to learn new stuff, actually, grueling, difficult new stuff. So this is going to happen, I'm sure. And somebody said she's going to have a great impact on psychiatry, Moroccan psychiatry, Dutch psychiatry, German psychiatry, and choose it, and the impact will be there. I'm sure it will continue. You will continue to ask yourself questions, and we hope we can continue traveling with you in developing it. And I think now the page 193 we can leave behind, because I remember last year we were having this wonderful dinner at the rooftop of the Acropolis Museum in Athens with the formidable Guloksus, yourself and me, and a whole bunch of other people from the World Psychiatric Association, of which Professor Moussaoui, of course, is a distinguished member. And it was really wonderful, this perspective, I thought. The way you talked about your research and your perspectives and the way you have continued since. So I think this is going somewhere, and I would leave it at that. I would like to thank you on behalf of Maastricht University for being so patient with us and developing your complexity perspective over the years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor van Os, for a beautiful laudation. And dear Dr. Hasmi, also on behalf of the Maastricht University, I congratulate you with the degree you have acquired. And of course, I extend my congratulations to your husband, your family and friends. And of course, your supervisors, Professor van Os, Dr. Gulaxus, and Dr. Drucker. I would like to thank, of course, everybody who has been present at this ceremony, mostly online. I would like to thank the opposition for their efforts, for the preparation, and of course for the traveling from Morocco and Paris. And I would like to thank the Padel and the technical support team, which makes the streaming of this session possible. I hope you have time to celebrate it, and I wish you all the best, a great career, and both professionally and privately, of course, because we are looking for the balance in these days. And having said that, I hope you can celebrate it today, and I'm going to close this session. The streaming